I know how deeply your entire nation, but I think I may say the whole world, sympathizes with me over the huge loss we've all gone through. It happened just 1 minute ago. The velvet curtains at Clarence House moved slightly as King Charles walked in front of the cameras. His face was pale, his voice shaking. This decision, he started, is one of the toughest of my time as king. Everyone across the nation went completely silent. Then came the words no one saw coming. Camilla's future as Queen Consort wasn't safe anymore. Starting right now, her royal title would be taken away, with more action coming later. A reign that was once built on quiet strength now stood on the edge of disaster. Before we dig deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The heaviness of this moment was unlike anything we'd seen in recent royal history. There was no planned celebration, no practiced smile, no carefully planned show of tradition. Instead, there was a king, clearly upset, standing next to Queen Mary's crown, a silent witness to betrayal. Its jewels and diamonds sparkled coldly under the lights. The speech was given with the same seriousness that came with his coronation, but the tone was heartbreakingly different. In that instant, the monarchy, often wrapped in hundreds of years of unshakable rules, felt surprisingly human. The timing alone sent shockwaves through Britain and around the world. 1 minute ago became the headline repeated on every major news outlet. Social media blew up within seconds, filling timelines with disbelief, sympathy, and guesses about what happened. Inside press rooms, editors rushed to rewrite their front pages. Within the palace, assistants froze in place, exchanging looks that showed they knew this moment was coming, but hadn't imagined it would arrive so suddenly and harshly. Across the royal households, silence spread like a cold wind through stone hallways. The Queen Consort's name hadn't been spoken with ceremony. It had been delivered like a court verdict. The seriousness of the announcement wasn't just about removing a title. It was about the deep symbolism. For years, Camilla's position had been carefully woven into the fabric of Charles's reign, a story of endurance, making peace, and quiet persistence. But now, that fabric was falling apart in real time, thread by thread, under the watching eyes of millions. Queen Mary's crown, usually a symbol of continuity and unity, now appeared almost like it was accusing someone, as if the jewels themselves had witnessed something deeply broken. Every word Charles said carried hundreds of years of weight, echoing through history like a serious announcement. The reaction within royal circles was immediate and intense. Some whispered that the king had been forced to protect the institution. Others believed it was a personal reckoning that was long overdue. The sense of urgency was obvious, as if the walls themselves understood how serious what had just been said was. Behind closed doors, senior advisors were already preparing backup plans, knowing that such a public announcement couldn't exist on its own. It was the kind of royal decision that would echo for generations. The hint of what was coming was impossible to miss. Charles's final words hung in the air like an ancient warning. The crown must remain pure, even when hearts are not. It wasn't just a statement. It was a breaking point. The monarchy, tied to tradition yet shaped by human mistakes, was entering a new and dangerous chapter. But to understand why this announcement shattered hundreds of years of royal tradition, we need to trace the quiet chain of whispers that started weeks before this moment of truth. It began not with a speech or order, but with a brooch. A sapphire that was once pinned to Diana's dresses showed up at a Geneva auction. Its engraving was unmistakable. Its origins were chilling. What should have been a small collector's note became the opening scene of a royal firestorm. Because when Diana's jewels reappear, the ghosts of the past follow. The listing appeared quietly at first, tucked inside an exclusive catalog sent to only the most elite collectors. A single photograph, a brief description, and an auction date. But among those who live and breathe royal history, it was impossible to miss. The sapphire brooch wasn't just any decoration. It was a piece forever connected to Diana's glowing early years as Princess of Wales, a symbol of grace that had captured the world's heart. Experts looked over the details, their eyes landing on one thing that made them freeze. The engraving, small, precise, and unmistakable. It matched the unique mark from Diana's personal collection recorded decades earlier and thought to be safely locked within the Royal Collection Trust. Within hours, the whispers began. Private messages between collectors turned into careful calls to royal historians. In London, Jewelers who had handled royal orders confirmed the craftsmanship. It was real, and that was the problem. This brooch should not be anywhere near a Swiss auction house. Its rightful place was within the monarchy's most protected vaults, a symbol of a legacy. The question wasn't just how it got there, but who had placed it there. The answer came like a lightning bolt. A trail of ownership meant to reassure potential buyers about authenticity traced the brooch's recent ownership to none other than Ramal House Camilla's private home in Wiltshire. For years, Ramal had been her sanctuary, a place outside royal rules. Now it was at the center of a scandal that threatened to pierce the monarchy's most carefully preserved image. Palace assistants were caught off guard. Within hours, their strategy meetings began. Spokespeople were prepped, statements written. The official line was careful. The item appears to be a wrongly identified heirloom. But behind closed doors, the tone was anything but calm. Princess Anne was among the first to sense that this was more than an unfortunate coincidence, known for her sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty to the crown's integrity. She demanded an internal check of the royal jewelry registry, a move that immediately shifted the situation from rumor to formal investigation. Her reasoning was clear. If one jewel had slipped through, others might have as well. The audit, normally a ceremonial routine done quietly within palace walls, suddenly became an urgent investigation, and its implications would reach far beyond the missing brooch. Whispers spread like wildfire. Senior advisors exchanged guarded glances in hallways. Royal jewelry archivists were called in for late-night reviews of old record books. Questions multiplied, and with each new discovery, the line between inheritance and stealing blurred dangerously. This was no longer about a single piece of jewelry. It was about the unseen movements within the monarchy's vaults that carried the power to shake trust built over generations. And as the investigation's reach went deeper into the palace's most protected corners, one scary truth became clear. When the jewels move, something bigger always moves with them. As whispers grew into formal investigations, the palace's most private records began to stir, setting off a chain of events that no one, not even the king, could control. Inside the Tower of London's guarded vaults, something shifted. Boxers once untouched for decades were quietly moved to Clarence House under the cover of night. Royal archivists whispered of missing records, fake transfer slips, and initials that shouldn't have been there. The truth wasn't hidden outside the palace. It was buried deep within its marble walls. The sudden move of the Royal Jewel Registry sent shockwaves through the inner circle. These records, normally sealed away in the tower's fortified rooms, were the monarchy's most closely guarded ledgers, a detailed record of every jewel, every transfer, every royal signature. Moving them without public explanation was nothing short of huge. For those who understood the rhythms of royal life, such a shift could only mean one thing. Something inside the palace had gone terribly wrong. The whispers that had begun with a single brooch were no longer whispers. They had become questions, sharp and unavoidable. As the audit began, what came up was more than anyone had prepared for. Records that should have been perfect were filled with problems. Pages showed valuations that didn't match their historical entries. Signatures appeared where none should have existed. Transfer slips lacked official countersignatures, and tucked in the margins of several key documents were two small initials that froze investigators in their tracks: CPB Camilla Parker Bowles. It wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but it was enough to turn suspicion into alarm. Princess Anne wasted no time. Known for her unwavering dedication to the crown's integrity, she confronted her brother directly. Her words were sharp, measured, and impossible to dismiss. "You can't keep this contained." Charles didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence carried the weight of everything he knew, but wasn't ready to say out loud. For a monarch who had spent his reign balancing tradition with modern times, this was a nightmare scenario. He wasn't just fighting a scandal. He was staring down the possibility of betrayal within the very walls meant to protect the monarchy. Meanwhile, William and Catherine moved with quiet precision. They didn't storm rooms or make demands. Instead, they positioned themselves between loyalty to their family and duty to the institution. William, carrying his mother's memory as a permanent shadow, felt the stakes more personally than anyone. This wasn't simply a question of jewels. It was about the legacy of Diana, the woman whose image had been endlessly examined, whose possessions were now tangled in a new controversy. Catherine, always composed, stood beside him as a stabilizing force, making sure that emotion didn't take over reason. Then came confirmation, leaving no room for doubt. Geneva's investigators had verified every detail. The sapphire brooch was real, the auction was authentic, and the sale had been authorized using Camilla's name. Whether she had planned it or been caught in someone else's scheme no longer mattered. The chain of evidence pointed unmistakably toward her private estate. For the king, the revelation was devastating. For the family, it was a turning point. And while the palace's hallways trembled with whispers, beyond those walls, the storm was already gathering with Camilla at its uneasy center. One night, long after the palace lights had dimmed, Camilla stood alone in the white drawing room. Behind glass, Queen Mary's crown glittered like a judge. "Do you think they'll take it from me?" she whispered to no one. In that moment, the woman who once conquered public hate felt the cold breath of history on her neck. For years, Camilla had projected a carefully crafted image of steadiness, a figure who had endured scrutiny and emerged, seemingly unshaken. But that night, the quiet revealed the truth, the weight of the whispers, the growing evidence. The subtle shift in the atmosphere within the palace, it all pressed down on her like an invisible force. Behind her public poise, fear had begun to seep in, slow and undeniable. The crown, once a symbol of her hard-won place in royal history, now stood as a silent reminder of everything she could lose. Those who worked closest to her noticed the change first. A housemaid passing by the doorway caught pieces of her whispered worries and carried them to others. A private secretary found her pacing halls, usually reserved for ceremonial calm. By morning, murmurs spread through the staff hallways, each retelling adding weight to the story. Camilla's private worries had become palace gossip. For a woman who had spent years keeping her composure under the harshest public gaze, this was an unraveling that no press statement could contain. Meanwhile, beyond her private thoughts, events were speeding up. Geneva's investigators had completed their final report, and the results left little room for interpretation. Every signature, every authorization, every transaction was traced with clinical precision, and at the center of the chain lay Camilla's name. Whether she had personally planned the sale or had simply been used as a cover no longer mattered. In matters of royal perception, appearance was the truth. Public opinion would not wait for details. Inside Clarence's house, William confronted his father with a quiet intensity that cut through hundreds of years of royal restraint. "You always said the crown belongs to the people," he told Charles. "Now prove it." It was not a threat, but a challenge. An emotional line drawn between legacy and loyalty. For William, this was not just an institutional crisis. It was personal. The jewels connected to his mother were now at the center of a scandal involving the woman who had once been the symbol of his family's breakup. For Charles, it was a blow that went beyond politics. It was an accusation wrapped in duty. As dawn approached, the whispers transformed into formal action. What had been a private fear turned into an official reckoning. Clarence's house, midnight. The Maple Room, a room used for coronation rehearsals, now became the stage for a confrontation that would define a dynasty. Charles at the head, an unwavering William and Catherine, silent but determined, and Camilla pale, escorted like a queen on trial. For decades, this room had witnessed the quiet rituals of royal preparation. Tonight, it became something else entirely. A courtroom without robes, where loyalty, history, and betrayal collided beneath the weight of centuries. At the center of the polished table lay a single folder from Geneva, its contents now deciding the fate of a woman whose journey to the throne had already defied convention. The king's expression was unreadable, but those present understood the seriousness of what was about to unfold. The inquiry began without ceremony. The folder was opened, its pages spread before Camilla like a mirror she couldn't look away from. Inside were the investigators' findings, authorizations, receipts, and signatures. The handwriting was hers. The authorization stamp was hers. The chain of evidence was damning in its precision. As she read the documents, her hands trembled. For years, she had withstood media storms and public scrutiny. But this was different. This wasn't a rumor. This was evidence methodically built. You let trust slip. Her words were neither cruel nor sympathetic. They were sharp, unvarnished, the language of someone who valued duty above emotion. In that instant, the entire mood shifted. Camilla's silence was no longer strategic. It was exposing. Then came Catherine. Until now, she had watched quietly, poised as always. But when she spoke, the room fell completely still. Her words weren't legalistic or accusatory. They were emotional, cutting through the noise with quiet power. She reminded everyone that the jewels were not just decorations. They were memories, symbols of lineage and loss. When one goes missing, she said softly, it's not only gold that disappears, it's a memory. Her voice carried the echo of Diana's legacy, of Elizabeth's restraint, of the unbroken thread of monarchy itself. It was a moment that neither condemned nor forgave. It simply revealed. By the end of the inquiry, the conclusion was unavoidable. The Privy Council would meet at dawn. Camilla's royal title would be suspended pending formal investigation. The decision wasn't shouted, nor was it written with flourish. It was delivered in silence, a silence that carried more weight than any proclamation. The decision was sealed in silence. But by morning, the entire world would hear the echo. The bells of St. James's rang like a funeral. At 10 a.m., under the gaze of cameras and sentries, King Charles stepped forward. Before him, Queen Mary's crown sat in judgment. His voice, steady but breaking, carried a message the monarchy had not heard in living memory. A Queen Consort, undone by the weight of her own crown. This was not the grand announcement of a new reign, nor the joyful chorus of national celebration. It was a reckoning, and the nation held its breath as the king delivered words that would echo through history. It is with deep sadness, he began, that I confirm a decision which has not come easily. The crown, as an institution of service and truth, must remain beyond reproach. Her Majesty, the Queen Consort Camilla, will from now on withdraw from all royal duties and give up her title. Each phrase struck like a ringing bell, deliberate and final. The man who had spent decades defending love was now defending legacy, choosing conscience over sentiment. Behind him stood William, shoulders squared, his presence a symbol of continuity. Beside him, Catherine, serene and composed, embodied the monarchy's future with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any speech. Their positioning was not accidental. It was a picture of transition, one generation stepping back, another quietly stepping forward. Charles's eyes flickered toward, the crown resting nearby, its diamonds glinting like a reminder of duty's cold permanence. He paused and then, almost in a whisper, delivered the line that would define this moment. This decision is made, not in anger, but in preservation. The jewels of this crown are more than stones. They are symbols of the trust between sovereign and people. That trust must never be broken. Outside, the reaction was instant. Some watched in stunned silence, processing the unimaginable. Others wept openly, sensing the end of an era, not through death, but through disgrace. Still others felt a strange vindication, an almost unspoken belief that history, long delayed, had finally caught up. Older women held portraits of Diana, whispering prayers as if a wound decades old had been reopened. Crowds gathered at palace gates, unsure whether to mourn, cheer, or simply stand witness to something they had never seen before. Around the world, headlines erupted. Crown in crisis. Justice for Diana. A monarchy divided. News anchors broke down every word of Charles's speech, every expression on William's and Catherine's faces. Political commentators debated the constitutional implications, while cultural voices framed it as the monarchy's most human moment in decades, a moment where love, power, and consequence collided beneath the glare of the world. And far from the commotion at Ramal House, Camilla watched alone. The woman who had once withstood public hostility with stoic defiance now faced silence. No assistance, no cameras, no applause. Just a television screen and the sound of bells ringing miles away. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't move. For once, history wasn't unfolding around her. It was moving past her. But this was only the beginning. Behind the broadcast's polished surface lay fractures that would reshape the royal family forever. London fell into a strange silence that night. Not celebratory, not mournful, something heavier. In private rooms, history was being rewritten with ink that would never fade. For Charles, it wasn't just a royal statement. It was the personal unraveling of a marriage, a legacy, and a nation's fragile trust. He spent the evening alone in his library, surrounded by shelves of speeches, journals, and letters that recorded decades of duty. The fire burned low, casting long shadows as he stared at the royal seal stamped on the order he had signed only hours earlier. Those words, so carefully crafted, so publicly delivered, now weighed on him like a private confession. "History never weeps," he murmured to himself. "People do." In that quiet moment, stripped of protocol and grandeur, he was no longer just a king. He was a man dealing with choices that would follow him to his final breath. Outside the palace walls, the mood shifted quickly. Public opinion began to come together around William and Catherine. They were seen not just as heirs, but as moral anchors, symbols of integrity, in a storm that had tested the monarchy's very core. Crowds left flowers at Kensington Palace, not out of celebration, but out of quiet acknowledgement that a new era was taking shape before their eyes. On social media, Catherine's composed presence during the announcement was analyzed, praised, and elevated as the embodiment of grace under pressure. William's silent strength, standing behind his father, was viewed as a bridge between the monarchy's bruised present and its uncertain future. Global media seized on the narrative. Charles's decision was cast at the same time as an act of tragedy and redemption. European outlets described it as the crown choosing conscience. American commentators called it the monarchy's most human moment in decades. In Australia and Canada, headlines emphasized the symbolic passing of moral authority to the younger generation. The decision was analyzed, debated, praised, and criticized, but never ignored. The king had done what few monarchs ever dared. He had drawn a line between love and legacy, and chosen the latter. Meanwhile, at Ramel House, Camilla withdrew from the world. She refused interviews, declined to issue statements, and surrounded herself with only a handful of loyal attendants. The woman who had once endured relentless public scorn without flinching now faced a silence that cut deeper than any headline. Late one evening, she walked through the garden that Charles had once tended. Stopping at a rosebush he had planted for her years ago, she plucked a single fading bloom and let it fall to the ground. It was a quiet, almost unnoticeable act, but it carried the weight of resignation. Within palace ranks, subtle changes began to unfold. Advisors who had once pledged allegiance to Camilla's circle now adjusted their loyalties. Sensing where the wind was turning, discussions about succession, protocol, and public trust gained new urgency behind closed doors. It wasn't chaos, but it wasn't stability either. It was a fragile in-between, a kingdom holding its breath as the old guard began to loosen its grip. And then, in a quiet act at dawn, a gesture signaled not just the end of one chapter, but the guarded beginning of another. A velvet box arrived at Kensington Palace at sunrise. Inside, nestled in royal silk, lay Queen Mary's crown. Alongside it, a handwritten note for safekeeping until it is time. With that, Catherine became the quiet keeper of what Camilla had lost, not by coronation, but by conscience. The transfer was private, silent, and deliberate. There were no photographers, no speeches, no announcements. It was a moment that unfolded away from the public eye. A quiet act of trust between a father and the woman who would one day carry the monarchy's weight on her shoulders. For Charles, it was symbolic and deeply personal. He was not passing down authority, he was entrusting legacy. For Catherine, it was no triumph. It was a responsibility she accepted with solemn grace, fully aware that what she held in her hands carried not just jewels, but centuries of memory, sacrifice, and expectation. Later that day, Westminster held a service of reflection. It was not a grand celebration, nor a show of mourning, but something in between. The atmosphere was heavy, thoughtful, as hymns echoed softly through the ancient halls. The congregation gathered not to witness a coronation or a funeral, but to acknowledge a turning point, a reckoning wrapped in tradition. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, streaking the stained glass. Windows like the collective sigh of a nation exhausted by weeks of revelation and reckoning. In that quiet drizzle, Britain seemed to exhale as if acknowledging that something had permanently shifted. Back at Ramel House, Camilla sat alone, surrounded by familiar silence. For days, she had avoided confronting the remains of her time as Queen Consort. But that morning, something changed. She approached the mantel where a single framed photograph of her coronation day had been lying face down since the announcement. With slow, deliberate hands, she turned it upright again. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It wasn't denial, nor was it bitterness. It was the beginning of a quiet, complicated acceptance. History had moved on, but she was choosing to face it rather than turn away. The symbolism of the crown's new keeper rippled quietly through royal circles. It wasn't power that had changed hands. It was principle. This was not the kind of transfer the monarchy usually displayed with parades and pageantry. It was more profound. In a single private act, Charles had acknowledged the future without undermining the present. He had chosen to trust Catherine with something more fragile than gold, the moral weight of the crown itself. Advisors understood the message. The nation felt it, even if unspoken. The monarchy's center of gravity was shifting, not suddenly, but unmistakably. But even as the crown found a new keeper, the true weight of Charles's decision would echo through his family in a way few could imagine. As dusk settled over London, Charles sat alone at Balmoral, writing a letter to his sons. "The jewels of this family are not made of diamonds," he wrote. "They are honesty, compassion, and restraint. If any of those are lost, the crown will lose its shine." His words were not for the press. They were meant for history. This was not a monarch's declaration to his subjects, but a father's quiet attempt to shape the legacy of those who would follow. It was a letter born not of triumph, but of hard-won clarity, a private testament that mirrored the public sacrifice he had made. In the days following the announcement, the world shifted its gaze toward William and Catherine. Their first public appearance since Camilla's removal was not marked by grand speeches or carefully choreographed celebrations. Instead, they emerged with quiet composure, their presence alone speaking volumes. Crowds gathered at the palace gates, not in protest or in shock, but in respectful acknowledgement of what their future represented. For many, it was as though the monarchy had found its moral compass once more, not through an official order, but through the silent strength of a new generation. Stepping forward, applause echoed through the streets, heartfelt and genuine, a reflection of public faith being carefully restored. The media eagerly seized this narrative. Headlines called it the crown's moral resurrection. Commentators described the moment as a rebirth, not of power, but of principle. Across continents, from London to New York, from Sydney to Paris, coverage framed Charles's decision as a rare act of conscience that had realigned the monarchy with the values it claimed to uphold. Analysts spoke of a new chapter, one where the royal family was forced to confront its flaws, openly rather than bury them behind palace walls. It wasn't the spectacle of coronations or jubilees that captivated the world. This time it was honesty, painful, public, but undeniably transformative. At Ramel House, Camilla watched these developments unfold from the quiet solitude of her private home. There were no statements, no attempts to reclaim public favor. Her chapter did not close with defiance, but with quiet resignation. She turned away from the noise of the world and faced at last the consequences of a crown gained through endurance and lost through perception. Her silence spoke more powerfully than any defense ever could. In that stillness, she became a figure no longer of controversy, but of history, her story sealed, her role transformed from active participant to silent witness. Through all this, one theme rose unmistakably to the surface. The monarchy's survival was never about perfection. It endured not because it was flawless, but because at its most critical moments, it had the capacity to reckon with its own failings. It was in reckoning, not in spectacle, that the crown rediscovered its strength. The jewels that had once defined its image now served as metaphors for something far deeper, the values that held the institution together. When the gold began to crack, and so beneath the weight of centuries and the glimmer of diamonds, a monarchy was remade, not through triumph, but through tragedy, truth, and time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.